Hi. Yes. Hi. Howdy.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. I'm still trying to figure out how to use a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, I've never used Zoom before, but when I was in for my class, I was using the school one, so it's kind of weird. It's different.
Yeah, I like it. I'm using it for work. Well, mostly WebEx, not so much Zoom, but it's a whole different animal when you're trying to put on the presentation.
Yeah.
I will have
Yeah,
to.
we gotta do photography like this, and
yeah,
it's different.
Test my IT skills. Let's see. Okay. So let's see what time it is. I'm going to wait just a little bit for more people to show up. But in the meantime, I have some notes here on the screen about muting your audio and turn your video off. Even though I'd love to see everyone's faces, I'm afraid it's going to affect the bandwidth because I'm doing this from home and I have slow country Wi-Fi. Also, if you have questions or comments, there's a chat function, and you can use the chat function to send questions. I'll see if I can multitask and look at the chat while I'm giving the presentation, but it's pretty unlikely. I don't know if I'm that savvy yet, but I will go to the chat at the end for sure. I did give a presentation via WebEx to City of Fort Worth folks, and there were about 80 people on that, and then nobody could hear me. My microphone wasn't working. So I really relied on chat for people messaging me questions, but also just to tell me that they couldn't hear me. So it was kind of like I was talking to myself. Let's see.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of weird doing a online meeting and presentation is so different than in person. Like
Yeah,
I really like in person a lot better.
me too. Me too, my friend.
Yeah, but I think now it's the way of the world. We're all using online resources while we've isolated ourselves in most cases.
Oh yeah.
So Zach, I'm gonna rely on you to send me some chat messages if you see that there's a problem.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Again, I don't know if I will see it, but at least, have you send me, whoops, let's see.
Little chat
Oh,
message
it
on the
popped
side.
up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You got it. You got it.
Oh, yay. Okay, I see a couple of people so they can hear me and said hi. Okay. So maybe the chat will pop up on the screen.
Yeah, I got it on mine. So yeah,
Okay.
you just push the chat button, and then the little text thing will pop up, and you can go down to the bottom here, like on the Facebook live thing, and then you can just like type in whatever you want to say, and then it'll scroll up. So
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So if anyone, I imagine most of you have probably used Zoom or Facebook chat or WebEx or something online where you're doing a meeting. But on Zoom, it's like at the bottom of your screen, there's a little microphone, and if you've muted it, it has it's red and it has like a line through it. And if you, right next to it would be the video camera, and you just put an X through that. And what I found is when I was doing that meeting for work with about 80 people, there was a lot of interference because some people didn't turn their microphones off or they didn't turn their video off when the presentation started. And then there's a lot of reverberation, and it just makes it hard for everyone to hear. So let's see. Got some people in the waiting room that I'm letting in. Also, if y'all wouldn't mind spamming me with chat right now just to say how you found out about the meeting, that'll be something fun to do for the next minute or two while I let in the last remaining people. We'll give them a couple more minutes. Let's see. Oh, okay, there's chat. All right, so I'm gonna scroll through the chat here real fast and say what y'all are telling me here, if I can figure it out. Ah. Okay, let's see. Haven't figured out how to turn the video off. You should just be able to push the video button at the bottom of the screen and it'll mute it. Let's see. Someone's from the Hill Country from Buchanan Dam. That's awesome. Someone said, hey, look in the bottom left corner for the video. Corinna says Uncle Ray and Aunt Kim are with her watching. Awesome. Hey, Zach, we've got Ellis County Master Naturalist. Hooray, Buchanan Dam. Elm Fork Master Naturalist. Facebook, several Facebooks. Houston NPAT and Facebook. Facebook friend invited. Hill Country Master Naturalist. A suggestion from Facebook. Wiley, Nipsot. Oh, an email from Nipsot. Elm Fork. Y'all can probably see this chat too. Lindsay said, you told me while discussing the University Drive project. Burleson, E-Blast. CCA Landscape Architects. They do native plant design. Hayes County Master Naturalist. Hi, Donna. Comp and Chris. Email from NPAT from Fonda. North Texas Master Naturalist. Oh wait, let me let some more people in. Waco, Keller, Sabine Netchus, chapter of the Master Naturalist. I've not heard of that. That's awesome. Elm Fork, Brenham, home of Bluebell Ice Cream, Texas Master Naturalist, Elm Fork, Fort Worth, Goodwater Master Naturalist. I do not know that one either. That sounds like a West Texas Master Naturalist. Fort Worth NPAT newsletter, Facebook. Okay. Ellis County Master Gardeners, Facebook. Okay. Let's see. Well, we're getting up there on participants. Okay. I'm trying to let in the last couple of people and then we'll go. Okay, so again, my name is Michelle Villafranca. I'm with the city of Fort Worth, and I am a park operations planner for the Parks Department. Some of you may have known me from the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge, where I worked for 11 years as a natural resource specialist, as well as I was a forester for the city of Fort Worth. And before all that, I worked for the Nature Conservancy and the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So probably most people, if you do know me from the Nature Center though. Before we get rolling on this, again, how you, whoa, somebody wrote on my screen. How did that happen? We'll just leave it. If you could mute your audio and turn off your video so that we get better bandwidth. Use the chat to submit questions, and I'll answer questions at the end. So let's see how I can get started. All right, this is Pollinators of North Central Texas. Where do I want that go? So you'll excuse me for my inability to multitask. Okay, so we're going to talk about first different forms of pollinators, or of pollination. So we have, and I don't know how to get that off my screen. Whoops, let's go back. So I apologize for the lines on my PowerPoint. I don't know how to get them off. There's entomophily, which is pollination by insects. You have anemophily, which is pollination by the wind, and zoophily, which is pollination by vertebrates. There are different types of pollination. Some lost. Okay, someone says they lost audio. I should not be muted. So you might try pushing your mute button, and that way so you can get back in and you can hear. So there are other types of pollination. Those are, you know, by wind, by mammals, and by insects. But there are ways that flowers get pollinated. Okay, so can everyone mute? It's the button down at the bottom left corner. It's a little microphone, and you push on that and mute it. Okay. Oops. Okay. Sorry about that. So incidental pollination is where I'm having a lot of trouble multitasking on this. Okay, incidental pollination is where insects will come along and they're pollinating, but they're not intending to pollinate. It's like mammals. This rodent here is pollinating, but not really meaning to pollinate. I think that is an animal from, it's not from the US, it's probably from Australia, but that would be an incidental pollinator. They're not really intending to pollinate, they just do it by chance. Then there's accidental pollination, which is also, they're also pollinating, but they're not really after the pollen per se, they're after the nectar. And so they're going in getting the nectar and then they're just getting pollen on them. And then intentional pollinators are those that are going for the nectar and they're going for pollen, and they have really evolved to be pollinators. Okay, next slide. So when we think of pollinators, we don't really think of mammals pollinating too much or birds pollinating too much. Hummingbirds, you know, they never land or perch on anything. They hover. So they're not really the greatest of pollinators. And also you see on this slide that there's no landing platform on the flowers for them to land on. So that's kind of a disadvantage. That's why there are long floral tubes for that hummingbirds pollinate. When they're getting the nectar, the flowers have the long floral tubes. So some other plants that attract pollinators would be these that are listed down here: coral bean, standing cypress, cardinal flower, lemon bee balm, coral honeysuckle, and trumpet vine. Those attract hummingbirds. I can't say that I've really seen hummingbirds going for lemon bee balm, but definitely like standing cypress and coral honeysuckle and trumpet vine. Another pollinator would be a mammal, it would be bats. So the long-nosed bat and there's another bat, the Mexican long-nosed bat, that pollinate flowers specifically, as well as fruit bats. In North America, though, the long-nosed bat is specifically pollinating saguaro cacti. So the saguaros are in the Sonoran Desert, and the flowers only bloom one time at night, and these bats come in and they pollinate the saguaro flowers. The bats are actually able to hover. Still admitting people in. And how they're finding the saguaro flowers, in addition to echolocation, obviously, they're attracted to white flowers. So saguaros, they grow really tall, they put on white flowers, they open one time at night, or the flower opens only once at night. And that's how these bats are able to pollinate. So I threw this in my presentation. Again, excuse these yellow lines. I don't know how they got on there. It was from annotation from Zoom somehow. I found this really interesting because you don't think of hummingbirds as eating insects. I mean, they will eat tiny little insects for some protein supplement, but they're not, you know, like an insectivorous bird, right? But somebody somehow either caught a hummingbird trying to eat a honeybee, or maybe the hummingbird, it was just a coincidence they were both in the same place, or the hummingbird was trying to fend off the bee. But at any rate, the picture looks like the hummingbird's going to eat the bee. So the base of the food chain is our pollinators, right? They're an important food source for all of our wildlife, and they're building up for all the mammals and other animals higher up the food chain. Native bees are the most efficient and effective pollinators for North Texas, or for any part of Texas, to maintain our ecosystems in Texas. And the value of pollinators was estimated by Parks and Wildlife to be $3 billion. Now, that's just native bee population. That doesn't count honeybees, which are not native to the US. They're European honeybees, and they were brought over for agriculture, food production. But more than 85% of our flowering plants require pollination by animals, and that would mostly be by insects. And many native plants are pollinated only by native pollinators. So let's see if I can do the poll. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll. We're going to test this and see how it works. I'm launching poll number 1. So I'll give y'all a couple of minutes, and if you can see the poll, try answering it. So the question is, what is the benefit of pollen for bees? And would it be fat or protein or a food source for their young? Yeah, you just answer the question, and then I'll show you the poll results in a minute. I'll wait for a couple more people to answer it. While I fidget with everything on my screen. I only want the mouse. Okay, so let's see. What did we say? I'm going to end the polling. And so it looks like quite a lot of people said food source to feed their young. And some people said fat, and some people said protein. So the benefit for bees with pollen is really all of the above. It was kind of a trick question because they're using the protein and fat in the pollen, and they're feeding their young. So, there are the results. So I give y'all a minute to look at that. Okay. All right. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so pollen is for protein and fat. Now the bees, our native bees have what is called pollen baskets and combs. So these are specialized for pollinating. So on the rear outside leg, they have a pollen basket, which I'm sure you can see it, but I'm going to see if I can use the laser pointer right here. That's the pollen basket. So on what they do is they get up in a flower, and this bee is really digging into that foxglove, kind of burrowing in there, and it's getting this pollen all over the bee. And so the bee will then take the rear leg, the comb, and scrape off the pollen and then rub it onto the pollen basket. So it's not truly a basket, we know that. It's just kind of like the elbow area of a bee's knees, maybe a bee's knee, close to a bee's knees. And they're just rubbing it onto their knee just as a way to transmit the pollen. So if you think of other insects, not bees, they don't have pollen baskets, so they haven't evolved to be such an efficient pollinator. Let's see. Try to go to the next slide here. So you have also the difference between long-tongued bees and short-tongued bees. That difference actually creates a problem for the short-tongued bees, which they have overcome. So long-tongued bees can reach deep into a flower to get the nectar, but short-tongued bees can't. So if you have a flower with like a long floral tube, or it's just a large flower, the short-tongued bees have evolved somehow they figured out how to nectar rob. So what they're doing is they're probing into the extrafloral nectary of the flower, which is at the bottom below the ovaries. So they're not going up to the top and pushing down to get nectar like other species. They are actually just going straight to the source and digging in and getting the pollen that way. It's kind of like a beer bong, maybe. I don't know. You know, instead of drinking out of the can, you're just using that tube. And so that is an evolution, probably for flowers to get more pollination than possible. So if they're attracting these species to them to get the nectar, then in turn, that also increases their chances for being pollinated. Let's see. Next slide. Flowers have adapted as well. They've adapted nectar guides. So that's just these different markings on flowers, and I have several different flowers shown here. A foxglove, which is right here, and skullcap, and spring beauty, and agellinus, and black-eyed Susan. So each of these look a little bit different. They have a different shape, and each of the markings are guides for different species, and probably generally for pollinators, but I'm sure that each of these are attracting certain species that are more specific to these. So the foxglove, if you've ever been out looking at foxglove and you see a bumblebee come up and squeeze into the foxglove or squeeze into the agellinus, it's just like it was made to perfectly for their bodies, right? They fit in perfectly, and that's how the pollen gets on them. So something like the skullcap would be tiny, teeny, teeny, tiny little solitary bees that would be pollinating that. And then the Claytonia, I haven't actually seen something pollinating it, but obviously creatures do. But I would assume it would be very tiny solitary bees and probably some fly species like gnats, just little insects. And the black-eyed Susan's really interesting because it has UV markings. And I don't know, there are probably several other species that have UV markings, but the black-eyed Susan, I found this picture on the internet that I thought was really interesting. So it's basically like a landing pad. It's like an airport, like the runway lights that lead pollinators into the prize, right? So if on the black-eyed Susan, the yellow part right here is the UV reflection that they're landing. So they land on that, and then it guides them in. Okay, the next slide, if I can highlight it. Okay, there are some floral preferences for pollination specializations. And one of those, I have them listed here. So you have the color, the bloom time, shape, patterns, scent, and each of these really affects whether a plant's going to get pollinated. So some butterfly species, probably most of them, really prefer certain colors of flowers versus others. So blue flowers and green flowers aren't nearly as attractive to a wider range of species as purple and yellow and white flowers. Bloom time is really important. If you think about when a pollinator will emerge from the ground or metamorph, what is their key plant, or are they a generalist, and what's blooming? So we know not everything is blooming all at once, right? It goes from like February all the way through November. We have blooming, especially in really any part of Texas, but North Texas especially. Also, the shape's really important. So you have flowers that have petals that are, big wide petals like Anopheris species, and then you have thistles where they have to kind of dig around. Then you have Asteraceae, so sunflowers that have lots and lots and lots of disc flowers. The scent is really important, and patterns like we just talked about before. So let me see if we can do poll 2. Maybe we can't. Oh. Let's see, poll 2. All right, we're gonna try that. Okay, so which pollinator purposefully visits flowers? So I'll give y'all a couple of seconds to answer that if you can see it. Okay, we got some people answering. I'm gonna check out chat real fast. It looks like Suzanne's helping to answer some of the questions that are in chat. So I'll put that down. Okay, so let's see, we're still getting some answers. All right, I'm gonna end the polling and share the results. Hopefully y'all can see that. It looks like nobody thinks moths do any kind of pollination with purpose. Had a good chunk of people said butterflies, more than 2/3 said bees, some people said wasps, and some people said ants. So bees are very intentional pollinators, and the reason is because they are searching for pollen and nectar. So pollen for their young, pollen to provision their nests, nectar for themselves. Oh, and I forgot to mention, let's see, let me drop the poll here. Flower constancy is in relation to purposefully pollinating. Bees find it more effective to go around to the same species of flowers. So whenever you landscape a garden, you know how I'm a really messy gardener and I landscape with all kinds of things and they're just all over the place and I have trouble putting them into groupings, but it is really preferred by pollinators if you put them in groups so they don't have to spend as much energy going here and then there and there. If they could kind of go, I hate to say this, but it's kind of like the Walmart, right? If they could go to one place to get just about everything that they need, then it's easier for them. So one way that bees are super special, our native bumblebees, that is, are super special is buzz pollination. So I'm sure a lot of people have probably looked at buzz pollination on the interwebs, or maybe you've witnessed it. I did do a video of some buzz pollination the other day because it's just so fascinating. But I thought if I can, I would share, let's see, the video if I still have it up. Let's see. So let me share that and we'll just play like a couple of seconds of it. And then I will explain. And let me go back to our presentation. No, what was that? No. Hold on. Ah, there we are. No. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So if anyone can just send me a message and make sure that you see the screen that I switched back to my presentation. So the thing that's really interesting about buzz pollination is the bees will grab hold of the anthers. So they grab hold of the you know, the floral part that has the pollen, like this bee in this picture, is like grabbing hold of it. And they're not doing this. Like, that's what I originally thought buzz pollination is, like they're shaking their whole body. But basically what they're doing is they're shaking their wings. So they're buzzing their wings. I don't know if you can see me, but they do this. Like, it's like shaking your shoulders. And all of the pollen's falling down onto their stomach, right? And then they use their combs to create those floral the floral, not floral, the pollen sacs. And then they go back to their nest and put that in their nest to provision it. So there are several native flowers that are especially adapted for our native bumblebees for pollination. The shooting star is one. That's a really nice example, and you can see how it got its name, right? A shooting star. Let's see. Let me go to the next screen. So what I did here is I just grabbed this really taxonomically crazy looking chart, and then I put a box around plant families that are native to North Texas and generally native to Texas that require buzz pollination. So I don't know if you can read it. It's kind of hard to read, but dayflowers, irises, anything in the lily family, the madder family, the gentiane, potato, the malvaceae, the mallow family, and euphorbia. So I just have over here the floral part. So the stamen is stamen, that's what's producing the pollen, and then you have the ovary right here. Why did I just put this picture here of a dayflower, a close-up of a dayflower, because I think it's so fascinating, because it's showing you that it's really not possible for a pollinator to land on it, right? That's why bees will grab a hold of it. It's just not made to be convenient, I suppose. Let's see, I already shared results on that. Now I'm gonna see, I had poll 3. So let's see what I'm asking in poll 3. I kind of went overboard on the polls just because this is my first time to do it. So I'm testing out polls. But the question is, nectar is an important energy source composed of, is it composed of water or proteins or fat or sugar or all or none? Maybe it's a trick question. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. Y'all are fast on that. Let's see, we got 55% of people have voted. We're up to 65%. The pressure's on. 74, 76. We're slowing down. People are still thinking. All right, I think I'm gonna stop there. We got 81% of the vote in. This is just like the November elections, but for naturalist nerds. Okay, I'm stopping it. I'm gonna share the results. So we had, nobody thought water is an important energy source, that nectar is an important energy source composed of water. Some people thought proteins, only 1% thought fat, and the rest of you said sugar. Bing, you're right, sugar. So good job, y'all. All right, let me close that. We'll go to the next slide. Arr. I need an IT assistant here. All right, so what are the 4 orders of insects that are most responsible for pollination? You see Hymenoptera, which are bees, wasps, and ants. They live in colonies, but some are solitary. They collect pollen for their offspring, which is the major important aspect of them. And they have 4 wings. So obviously ants don't have 4 wings, but Hymenoptera includes ants. I don't think that ants are too responsible for pollination though. Lepidoptera would be butterflies and moths, so they're solitary, they're not living in colonies. They collect pollen for themselves, but they're not giving it to their young. They have 4 wings and they have colored scales. And then Diptera are flies. So these are things that we generally think are really pesky. And we swat them away, but they're actually pretty good pollinators, but they're just kind of the underdogs, I guess. They're also collecting pollen for themselves, but not for their offspring. And they have 2 wings. And Coloptera, which are beetles, and they're collecting pollen for themselves as well. So really bees are the only ones that are collecting the pollen for themselves and for their offspring. We'll go to the next one. There. So this is a list of 9 bumblebees that you might find in Texas, not all probably right here in North Texas. But I just thought it was a really neat graphic to quickly kind of narrow down identification of bumblebees. So Texas has 700 or about 700 native bee species, and 9 of those are bumblebee species. Next. Okay. So now we're going to break it down and we're going to look at bumblebees in particular. So bumblebees are social bees, and they're living in colonies, but they're not big colonies like you would, like honeybees would live in. They're gonna nest in rodent burrows or grass thatch. They work collaboratively and cooperatively, and they defend their nests, but maybe not, they're not so aggressive when they're foraging. So when you see them out going to flowers, it's like they're drunk on nectar, and they're not gonna defend anything. There's nothing to defend. They're away from their nest. But if you were to find their nest, then maybe they would see you as a threat. This is a picture of a bumblebee nest that someone brought to the 2014 North American Prairie Conference that was held at Botanic Gardens. And I was so fascinated by it because I had actually not seen a bumblebee nest in person. That's pretty embarrassing being that I'm a naturalist, but I haven't seen one out in the wild. So the interesting thing about bees is they're central foragers. So they have a nest, and then the females are going out from the nest, and it's not just the queen, she's kind of doing her thing, but the worker bees are female, and they're not going to go super far out from their nest, and they're basically provisioning the nest. So I got this off of the Xerces Society website, and I thought it was just too good of a graphic to not use in this, but basically I'll read it in case it's tiny print for y'all. Basically, the queen of a bumblebee emerges from hibernation in the spring, and she finds the nest site, such as an abandoned rodent burrow. They're not reusing the same nest from one year to the next, and it's not the same queen each year. They have an annual life cycle. So this new queen, she creates a nest for the nectar and the pollen, and she lays her eggs. So when the daughters emerge, those are the worker bees. They take over the foraging and other duties. So the queen is busy making more bees, and then I guess she kind of kicks back once she has some worker bees. And then in the fall, they've got a colony going, and they have their male bees, and the queens and the males leave to go find mates. So the original queen is going to die, and then the males are going to die after they mate, and the female worker bees are going to die. They live for like 1 or 2 months. The queen will go out and she'll fertilize. They'll have new queens, and they'll get fertilized by these males that are out and about, and then those new queens hibernate over winter. Let's see. So some interesting bee species. We have the brown-belted bumblebee, and just like some other native bumblebees, they nest underground in colonies of up to 50. It could be more, but I think generally they're about 50, and they're dividing the labor amongst the different castes, but they're working, like you have the young doing one thing, first being born, and then they become worker bees and they help with building the nest. And then the older bees also are helping kind of tend the young. The ones that are in the middle age group are the ones that are going out and foraging and bringing stuff back. And then of course you have the queen. So as they're going through their life cycle, for one bee is doing many different things throughout their life, and they will aggressively defend their colony. This other bee is the American bumblebee, and it was supposedly one of the most prevalent bees in the US, but there's been great decline. I imagine that pretty much all bumblebees, there's great decline. It's not just the American bumblebee, but the attribution of why they're declining could be a parasite, which is that Nosema bombi. And it could also be pesticide and habitat loss and degradation. Those are some given obvious ones. Now the parasite that is affecting the bumblebee, the American bumblebee, it doesn't actually kill the bumblebee. What it does is it basically affects the sperm of the male bees, so that it's just reducing their chance of successful mating. So then you have fewer bees. So it actually affects the male sperm and therefore the possibility of more males. So you can imagine that that's going to kind of tamp down on the number of bees you would have, and their population would crash if you don't have successful procreation. So some other types of bees are solitary bees. There's 90% of the bees that we have in Texas are solitary bees. So we have our bumblebees, which are live in colonies, and then you have all the rest of the native bees are solitary. They nest in the ground or they prefer open ground, but they can also nest in pith and deadwood and wildflower stems, and they don't defend their nests because they're solitary, so they just probably flee when they if they feel threatened. One interesting thing about pith nesting in stems of wildflowers, this is why I, let me check chat real fast. This is why I don't clean up my flower beds over the winter. Okay, someone's saying, yes, touch your screen to enlarge if you want to look at a picture more closely if you're on a phone. So in my garden, I have flowers blooming all year, all the way into November, and then I leave all that dead standing material, the plants, I leave them because that's cover. It's material for winter birds that are migrating here, like your sparrows. And also, I want to leave the debris in the same place where it was because of the pith nesters. So what I do is I leave it standing, and then like in February or March, I then come along and I cut the stalks down, but I let them lay down into my flower bed so that whatever was using that plant as their host plant is nearby for the spring season's growth of that same plant, which will be the host plant. Okay, next slide. It's hard to see the button. Okay, so some solitary bees that are ground nesters. We have digger bees. So they live in the same habitat as the Comanche harvester ant. Their nest is solitary, but they're in dense aggregations. So where I've seen them is in this real sugar sand soil at the Fort Worth Nature Center. It's basically like beach sand, and there's whole colonies of them in that sand, and that's the same habitat that Comanche harvester ants are in. what the males do is they'll emerge. I think this is pretty common in quite a few solitary bees. They'll emerge first in the spring, and they cruise around the nesting site looking for other females. So then the females will then emerge, and then the males are just right there. So it's kind of like hanging out on Sunset Strip or something, and you're a guy and you're waiting there to see what ladies are passing by, and you put your moves on them. So then we have sweat bees, and I think most people are familiar with sweat bees. They are attracted to sweat. The females are carrying the pollen, but not the males. So I guess it's like the females are cooking and the males are looking for the ladies, probably. Excuse me. So they're provisioning their nest with pollen, and then the adults are eating nectar. And so you've had probably like a sweat bee land on you. There are several species of sweat bees, but generally, you know, they're about that big. They kind of look like a fly at first, and then you realize, no, it's a bee. Then there's mining bees, which I don't really know too much about. Excuse me. And then squash bees. And so I find squash bees really fascinating because squash flowers, or flowers in that family, the Cucurbidae family, are opening only in the morning, and then they close up by the afternoon when it gets really hot. And so the squash bees are actually, they've got to hang out by that plant or in that area where those species of Cucurbidae are growing, so that they can pollinate it. And so they'll actually do their thing. They'll actually mate on the flower of the squash. So it's like they want everything, they want their cake and eat it too. And I also read that, and I don't know this personally because I haven't done it, but that squash bees will go down about 2 feet for their nest. I've never tried to dig up a squash bee nest, but you know, you'd probably have to dig about 2 feet according to what I've read. So some other solitary bees that would be in wood or pith of flower stems are mason bees. So they're nesting in abandoned wood-boring beetle cavities. So that shows you, oh, okay, you have some animals that are using abandoned nests of rodents like bumblebees. And then we have mason bees who are using abandoned wood-boring holes or holes from wood-boring beetles. So everything is kind of reused, kind of like reduce, recycle, reuse. So the mason bees are nesting in that. So obviously they're not making their own nest. They're not excavating their own nest, and they're using mud to put the plugs in and kind of line the nest. So mason bees, they'll actually, start at the back of the hole. They'll provision it with nectar, with pollen. They'll lay their egg in there, and then they seal it up with a partition of mud. That's why they're mason bees. Well, what they do is they put the females, and I don't know how they know this. It's like nature is so incredible. The females are laid at the very back of the nest, and then the males are up at the front. So the males are gonna hatch first, and they're gonna come out, and then they're hanging out. And so they're in like a aggregation. So it's not just only one, solitary bee. It's an aggregation of solitary bees. So they'll hatch, and then the males are swarming around looking for a mate, and then the females come out. So I think that's just so amazing. How can they decide? How did nature figure out that the females go in at the very beginning, because the males are going to hatch earlier, and then the males are able to cruise for a mate that way? Eastern carpenter bee, they nest in wood. They don't have a queen bee. They're not doing anything collaboratively or cooperatively like a bumblebee would. They're eating pollen and nectar, and they drill into wood. So some people, I guess people call the exterminator, because they're like, oh my gosh, carpenter bees are, drilling into my eaves. Well, I seriously doubt that a whole house is going to fall down because of a carpenter bee versus termites. And in fact, I just found some carpenter bees are actually going at my house. They're going up under the ridge of a metal roof that I have on an awning. And I guess they're drilling into the plywood that's underneath, but I'm just like, yay, I've got carpenter bees. Another bee that's interesting is the leaf cutter bee. So they're cutting leaves, right? And they're putting it into their nest and provisioning their nest. Well, the leaves are actually, you know, why would they do that? I have to always ask questions. Why? I want to know. I'm curious. Well, the reason they're cutting the leaves is because when they stick it in there, likely that's providing moisture in their nest. So let's see. I had another poll. Let's see what poll 5. So. All right, I didn't skip poll 4. Which bees have an annual life cycle? Would it be honeybees, bumblebees, or solitary bees? Wow, okay, we got 26% of the vote, 36, 40, 50. Okay. We got 71%. We're slowing down. Okay. Okay. All right. We're going to end the polling and see what we got. Share results. All right. So which bees have an annual life cycle? Honeybees, bumblebees, or solitary bees? So the answer is actually bumblebees. So bumblebees, you know, they have the queen, they have their colony. The queen dies after she's mated in a the original queen dies at the end of the season, and the new queen is bred, basically, and then she goes and finds the new nest site, and then she hibernates over winter. And as you know, honeybees, their hives could go on for years, and they just keep going. So they're not an annual. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing results. All right, next screen. Okay, so we're moving on to wasps. You know, my legs are getting sore. I'm sitting on the floor on a hardwood floor. So we have 5-banded typhid wasps. I think they're really interesting because, well, when I first saw it, I was like, what is that? It's so, they're like, I don't know if you can see my finger. So they're like about an inch or more long. And at first you think it's a yellow jacket, but it's not. So their larvae, they feed their larvae grubs. And whatever they feed their larvae, what the larva does is it feeds on the non-essential tissue first. So they capture their prey, they stick it in their nest with their larvae, lay their eggs, the larvae hatch, and the prey is paralyzed, right? It's still alive. And then the grub of the typhid wasp starts eating the non-essential tissues first, which that's very science fiction-y. And what a horrible way to go, right? Like, I'm actually glad that I'm a human and not a prey item for wasps or spiders. So they nest and overwinter in the soil, and the adults feed on nectar. And so this is, I forgot to mention that almost all the pictures in my presentation, if they don't have a name attribute to the picture, or pictures that I've taken in my yard. So my yard's like full of plants. And so this typhid wasp is pollinating or feeding on goldenrod. So I have 2 species of goldenrod in my yard, and I actually collected them just kind of off the county road, right by my mailbox. And they start blooming in September. They go all the way through November. And so that means I have pollinators, monarchs, all kinds of stuff all over goldenrod at the end of the season when they need it the most. Let's see. So we have a picture of a potter wasp. They're feeding on nectar. They build that nest that looks like an urn, and they're taking mud, or they're taking soil and a little bit of water, and they're chewing it up, and then they spit it out and build this nest, and it takes them a couple of hours to build the nest. And then right when they're done, they stick their abdomen in the hole of the pot, and they lay their egg, and then they get a caterpillar or some prey item, paralyze it, stuff it in, and seal that prey item in with the soon to emerge larva so that it can be eaten alive. Good stuff. Some other wasps, we have sand wasps. I've seen a large colony of these, or an aggregate of their nests, at the Fort Worth Nature Center, also again in that sugar sand soil where it was bare. And so sandy soil usually has, because it's so porous and it's really a rough environment for plants to grow in unless they're adapted, it leaves some bare spots on the ground, and those bare spots are where the wasps like this will select for their nests. So one thing that I find really interesting about sand wasps is that they have these aggregate nests. Well, those nests are attracting parasites, and they're attracting not only parasites, like parasites of themselves, but they're also attracting kleptoparasites, which are these flies and wasps who don't actually do the hunting themselves. They just go to an area of aggregate nests, and once something else, like say that sand wasp, captures a prey item, then these kleptoparasitic wasps or flies will then swoop in and take the prey item. And the other funny thing about sand wasps is they're preying sometimes even upon their own parasites. So it's like reverse parasitism. It seems like it's a really wild west thing going on there. Another interesting insect is the ichneumon wasp. And so they're parasitizing basically anything. They have these ovipositors that are really long. So when you see it, it looks like a whiptail. And that's where they lay their egg into the host. And they have two different parasitic strategies. So one is, excuse me if I don't pronounce this correctly, idioboint, which is they paralyze the host species or their prey, and it prevents the growth, the continued growth. So they'll parasitize, they'll paralyze it, stuff it in their nest, and then that creature, the prey item, is still alive, but it doesn't continue to grow. And the coinoboint is a type of parasitic strategy where it's paralyzed, but the paralyzed creature is still growing while it's in the nest. And in both cases, the larva of the ichneumon wasp is eating its host alive. Either way, you're paralyzed, you're not growing, or you're paralyzed and you're still growing. Either way, you're getting eaten alive. I think that the one where it allows the host to continue growing is pretty amazing. That's an amazing strategy. All right, next. There, okay. So now we're going to move on to butterflies. I think most people know a lot about butterflies probably, so I don't spend as much time on them. But the things that I think are really fascinating about butterflies is that they are tasting everything with their feet. So whenever you see like a butterfly walking on poop, well, maybe they're tasting the poop, right? That's what I think of anyways. And that's why this little cartoon is like, I'll stay over here, thanks. I'm not gonna go walk on the poop. They smell with their antenna, and they have pheromones that they're releasing, and it's getting picked up through the antenna. And of course they have scales, which is just very fine, scales that are colored, different colors. And that's how you get this amazing color diversity, like my backdrop here. And of course they have chrysalis. So let's go to the next one. So I just put the monarch's life cycle, or any butterfly's life cycle, on here. They have five instars. So they go from egg, the 5 instars, and excuse me, each instar is where they're growing big, right? Because they're eating. They're growing big and they're popping out of their skin. So that starts the next instar. And then they grow big again, they pop out of their skin. They keep doing that until finally they've had enough to eat. And then they attach to a substrate, form their chrysalis, and they metamorph into a butterfly at a later point. I just threw this on here so that you see the difference between a male and female monarch is simply the spot on the hind wing is on males, and it has pheromones, I believe. And so I do have a video, but I think I'm not going to show it because it's probably better for in-person presentations versus me showing it to you on YouTube, because you can go look at it on YouTube. But it's just really fascinating to watch like a accelerated video of that whole process. All right, so we're gonna do a poll. Let's see, what is my poll? 6. So I was wondering if you have ever seen a chrysalis in the wild, not one that you nurtured yourself, but you just stumbled upon it. I like my cowboy glass. It's kind of hard to tell what it looks like on screen, but it's an awesome Wild West glass. All right, so we got about 86% of the vote in, so I'm going to end the poll and we'll share the results. So this is awesome. It looks like of everyone that voted, 72% have seen a chrysalis in the wild and 28% have not. I don't see them very often. And when I do see them, I get super excited, right? And of course you got to take a picture of it. But I think it's not really that common for people to see chrysalis, just because most people probably aren't looking for them. And as with everything, if you're actually putting out the effort looking for it, you're not going to find it. So it has to be mostly happenstance, I think. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this, I'm just going to let y'all kind of look at it. I put some different butterfly species, what their host plants are and what their nectar plants are. Let's see, just a bunch of pretty pictures. But again, most of this is exclusively from my yard because I have lots of pollinator plants in my yard. I guess the exception would be milkweed. I don't have the milkweeds in my yard. I only have probably 2 butterfly milkweeds in my yard, but the rest of them are just out and about. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And I put these on here not to linger on them, but I just think the Herd Museum did a really good job of a quick graphic to show what species we have here in this area. And then I had a poll for this. Y'all are probably getting tired of polls. But we'll just do, this is the next to the last poll, so we'll do it for fun. Butterflies collect pollen for their young. Do they or do they not? And we'll give you a minute. Okay, we got most everyone. I'm going to end polling, share results. So they do not collect pollen for their young. That they're just kind of accidentally pollinating, really, because what their main thing that they're interested in is the nectar. Now, native bumblebees are collecting pollen for their young and for themselves. We'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we're going to go to moths. Let me stop sharing the results and close out. Okay, there's moths are kind of not too many people are interested in them. They, you know, they're at night. We're usually at home in bed or just indoors watching TV or avoiding the heat. But there's actually quite a few naturalists that really pay attention to moths. I know a couple of people who are on this presentation online, and they go out and they do mothing, and they're really, really good at identifying moths and exciting and encouraging other people to pay attention to moths, because that's really moths. There's not a whole lot known about them. And you could go buy a book like the moths of North America or the moths of the Eastern US and the moths of the Western US. And it's thick. It's like probably 1.5 to 2 inches thick. And people don't know anything about moths, but they are pollinators. So most of them are nighttime pollinators, but a few of them pollinate during the day. And also the difference with moths versus butterflies is that moths, they cocoon or pupate underground, and they have feathery antennae instead of the little ball antennas like butterflies have. And again, they're mostly at night versus in the daytime, and butterflies aren't really, they're not flying at night. So the clearwing moth here is a daytime or a diurnal pollinator, and it mimics a bumblebee. It flies like a hummingbird. It could fly by you and you see it and you think hummingbird. And the reason on the wings that it's clear is because any of the scales have rubbed off, like any color. I mean, they don't really start out with color, but I think they have just like a light color, and then it really wears off. They fly like a hummingbird, and their host plant is the coral berry and honeysuckle. And this is a clammy weed. And again, this is one of those types of flowers that requires a long tongue. And so if you've ever looked at a clearwing moth, they have a really long proboscis. So a polyphemus moth is those really big ones. They're like 5 inches, right? And if you've ever seen them, it looks like owl eyes or something, like a set of eyes on a wall. And you're like, oh my God, what is that thing? It's so huge. Well, it's a polyphemus moth. The eye spots probably evolved to detract or dissuade possibly like an owl or something. I don't know if an owl would, you know, go for it, but why would it have these big eye spots? It's not getting eaten by a raccoon, right? It's not getting eaten by coyotes, so it doesn't really need eye spots to detract a coyote. So it might be owls that is detracting from being eaten. They can fly up to 4 miles to mate. Their host plant are tree species, of which I don't know, I think it's several different tree species, and they have a vestigial mouth, which means it's modified and reduced. So basically they live to mate and die. So they'll mate, they'll eat obviously leading up to when they're going through their pupal stage. In their larval stage, they're gonna eat. But then once they have emerged as adults, their main thing is just to go out and mate so that they can perpetuate the species. Excuse me. The bagworm moth is something that a lot of people have probably seen on cedar. And so for the longest time, I never knew that that was actually an insect that made that. I don't know what I thought. I guess I thought like sap fell and some of the needles of the cedar kind of fell together, but it's actually a moth that's up in that cocoon. So the female creates that cocoon and she just lives in there, and there's a hole at the bottom where she defecates out of. She doesn't have wings, so she's hanging out inside that cocoon, and then the male will come and find that hole and they mate that way. And then they have offspring, and then the offspring will leave and then go make excuse me, nest. Let's see. So another interesting moth is the yucca moth. That is, they're obligate pollinators and herbivores of yucca, and this is really important. It seems like not a very good survival strategy, but they're kind of like, they're doing everything at the yucca. So this picture I have right here is a pell yucca or pell leaf yucca. And well, I'll tell you a story in a minute, but so this is, the flowers are hanging down, right? They're drooping down, and that usually means it's going to be pollinated by a moth because they come up from below. It's white or creamy white and pale, so it's opening. It stays open during the day, but it's open at night so as to attract the moths to pollinate. So what obligate pollinator means is that they actually need the plant and they consume the plant. So you can't have one without the other. You can't have a yucca without the yucca moth, and you can't have a yucca moth without the yucca. So I was, when I was at the Nature Center, we had 3 different species of yucca at this one site. And there's a yucca that is not common at all, and it's endemic to north central Texas. It's called the Glen Rose yucca. And it looks basically like an Arkansas yucca. Now, an Arkansas yucca is very common, and the only way you can tell the difference between an Arkansas yucca and Glen Rose yucca is if you let the flower stalk come up, and then you see the structure of the flower stalk. Well, deer kept eating all of the flower stalks before they would shoot up. So there was no way I could tell or even collect seed from the Glen Rose yucca. And the reason I was trying to collect seed is to send it to the state of Texas, their rare plant seed seed reserve. So they actually have like a seed bank down in Houston at the Mercer Arboretum, and I was trying to collect the seed for them. So what I had to do is build a big exclosure fence around it, and I just got a bunch of patches of yucca, and it didn't matter if it was Arkansas yucca or Glen Rose yucca. I just built a big old fence around it so the deer couldn't get in. And then once the stalk came up and seeded and flowered and then produced seed, then I could go into that exclosure and collect the seed. Well, when I would collect the seed, I would open up a couple of them. They would have holes drilled into them because the yucca moth had gotten in, and as larvae had eaten through all the seeds. So obviously you can't eat those seeds. You can't use, they're not gonna germinate. But the thing about the yucca moth is that even though they're laying their eggs in the seed of the plant that they need to live and to pollinate, their larvae aren't eating all of the seed. And then they're also pollinating the yucca so that the yucca will continue. Anyways, this it's very fascinating. Let's see, so some other, another moth species is the banded sphinx moth, and you see that around is pretty big. And sometimes it maybe looks like, not really like a hummingbird, but you might see it fly by and go, oh, no, that wasn't a hummingbird. It was a big sphinx moth. They're using Enothera or primrose species, or what they prefer. And it's, the primrose usually has big, wide open flower, you know, with large petals. They're opening at night and closing up in the day. So they're open at night. The moths are going to pollinate it at night, and the light color attracts them to it so they can find it. Moths are also using their feathery antenna to identify mates and to not echolocate, but it helps them with their flying during the night. Let's see, we'll go to the next one. And then flies. So the flies are our last one. We went through bees, wasps, butterflies, and moths, and now we're on flies. So like I said, flies are kind of like the, they're the underdog. People don't really like flies, don't care much about them, I guess. A lot of flies superficially resemble bees because they're hairy. So bumblebees, you know, they have hairy abdomens. That's how you know a bumblebee is a bumblebee and a carpenter bee is a carpenter bee. Carpenter bees have shiny abdomen, not hair. But some of these bees, I mean, these flies look like bees because they have hairy abdomens. The life cycle of most of them are not known. Again, who cares about flies, right? I mean, I do, but most people and researchers are not going to research flies. They're a good pollinator, but not that great. Let's see, not as good as bees. So this one's really interesting. The greater bee fly is this tiny little bee. It looks like a cartoon with this really long mouth part, but it's not a stinger. I mean, they wouldn't sting you. But what they do is they'll go to their host prey item, so whatever they're gonna predate, and if they can't get into the nest to attack or the prey item, they'll just take their eggs and they'll flick their eggs into the nest. So they're kind of like hovering somewhere and they're just throwing their eggs if they can't actually get into a nest to predate. Let's see, next slide. Longhorn beetle. So I have this really cool video of a longhorn beetle that I saw this weekend at Madden Prairie, which we'll see if I can show you that. But basically they're feeding on dead wood. The larvae feed on dead wood, but the adults are using the nectar and pollen of flowers. So they're kind of accidentally pollinating because they're picking up pollen when they're feeding. And then they're also going to be nectar robbers because they can't always get down into the flowers. So they'll pierce into the extrafloral nectaries to access the nectar. And they're also known as mesensoil pollinators, which I think is funny, is because they'll, let's see, they'll get on a large petaled flower and they're pollinating and they're pooping and they're just pooping where they're pollinating or where they're eating because they're not pollinating intentionally. Let's see, let me share. Okay, here's this video that I took, let's see, when I was out at Madden Prairie. Let's see if I can play it. Oh, uh-oh, let's see. Hopefully y'all can see that. It's on a white prickly poppy, and the beetle is drilling into the flower. So the flower hasn't emerged. It's drilling into and eating down at the extrafloral nectary. Okay, we'll go back to the presentation. Okay, hopefully y'all are all back and can see my screen. So the next beetle that I'm going to talk about is the yellow-marked breasted beetle. And these are the ones that you see all over pink evening primrose, and they're always very dusty because they're getting pollen all over them. Their larvae are wood-boring beetles, but then the adults are feeding on the nectar. And you can kind of see, I don't know, it's hard to see, but they have pollen all over them. And they're flying with their hind wings only. Let's see, next. There. So this is kind of where I talk about threats of pollinators, and we all kind of know all of this. You probably see it on every presentation you've ever seen about almost anything natural history related. But this picture I got from a former Texas Parks and Wildlife state entomologist where there's a goat farm, and then there's nothing there because they've overgrazed that patch of land. But then on the other side of the road is this beautiful wildflower display on the right-of-way for the highway. And the goats, I like to imagine, are kind of looking over at everything on the other side. But as you know, goats are browsers, they're not grazers, but if they have nothing else to eat, then just like we would eat anything. Let's see. Also, just mowing. We obviously have to mow to maintain areas, but we can have some areas that are less maintained and not mowed as frequently, and we don't need acres and acres and acres of golf course lawns, because that leaves nothing. It's a biological or ecological desert. This is a picture I took when I was a forester for the city. It was once a treat area because it was in the floodplain of the Trinity River. However, I think it was probably like a pasture before it was developed into a neighborhood. But I just was like, especially when I was a forester and I was doing tree planting programs, I was like, this place needs something. There's nothing. There's no shrubs. There's no ornamentals. There are no trees. But this is what we're doing. We're taking beautiful, diverse areas and we're bulldozing them and then putting in lawns. And there's nothing left for pollinators, which means there's nothing left for birds. There's nothing left for mammals. There's nothing left for reptiles and amphibians, because we've taken away the base of the food chain, which are the plants and then the pollinators. Obviously, we all need somewhere to live, but it would be nice for each of us where we live to have some native plants in our landscape and then share those native plants and ideas with others. Also, ag is taking away from pollinators and herbicide. So I just had a little situation today that made me so mad. I'm already so upset about everything going on in the world, and I'm on edge. And then I had to pick my dogs up at the kennel. So I was driving on this farm to market road, and I saw TxDOT, these big tank trucks full of herbicide, and they were spraying, like 20 feet out. They were just boom spraying all along the right of way, all the way to the fence line of the private property. And so I was like, when I get home, I'm gonna track down who the supervisor is who issued that order. I mean, I know TxDOT maintains the right of way. So I called, and I was very nice to the person that answered. She gave me the email of the supervisor. So I emailed him this very well composed email that didn't make me sound too crazy, but probably just crazy enough. Telling him all the reason, basically I don't have to tell y'all are watching a pollinator presentation. But what was so devastating about it is it wasn't like a right-of-way full of Johnson grass. It was a right-of-way that had white rosin weed, which is a native endemic that's only in north central Texas out of the entire globe. It had probably 4 or 5 other native species. I know it because I stop there and collect seed. And they're doing it all for miles and miles and miles. So they're killing these last prairie relic that are existing on the side of the highway. And then of course, just brushing in. If you have a dense pasture full of cedar, you're not gonna have very many flowering plants in there. So I just put this in the Texas Conservation Action Plan for the Cross Timbers region. Texas Parks and Wildlife has done one of these conservation plans for each region of Texas. So if you don't live in the Cross Timbers region, you can Google this handbook and read what species are threatened or endangered or globally threatened, imperiled. But you can see here we have 18 species that were listed on there of species of greatest conservation need. And Texas has over 1,300 species on that list. And most of them are rare or declining, or they don't even have names, right? They have like a Latin name, but they don't have a common name because we don't know anything about them. Let's see, like this mining bee that doesn't even have a common name. Also, the Texas Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife, they have been working with legislatures to pass the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And so that is for money from existing royalties from the energy and mineral production on federal land, comes back to states, all 50 states. And so Texas can stand to receive $60 or more million that would go not towards hunting, because hunting is already supported from sales tax and hunting, like guns and fishing license and all of that. Well, this money goes directly to grants through Texas Parks and Wildlife for habitat restoration and different things that are non-game species. Let's see, next slide. Get my cursor there. So what is the native habitat here? I'm just showing, like, we've taken our native habitat and we've turned it into something that's not native. So one of the things in the Parks Department that I work for, one of the things that I'm working on is how to get more native and natural areas within the parks instead of turning all of our parks into a sterile landscape. So what can you do? You can do these things. Many of you probably already are doing these things. Allow areas of your landscaping to be messy. I say messy because that's kind of in the eye of the beholder. And all of these pictures are from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Let's see. What else can you do? Well, most weeds are not actually weeds. They are host plants and habitat and food sources for pollinators. So I liked this little flyer that was for dandelions, because so many people hate dandelions, but if you look at when they're blooming in February, you often see a lot of species pollinating them because that's the only, or getting nectar from them because that's the only food source. Let's see. And you can just, however you can, grow plants in a greenhouse on campus or at a school if we are ever able to go back to schools and college campuses. Develop a demonstration project in your neighborhood or your yard. Jaime Gonzalez down in Houston, he works for the Nature Conservancy of Texas. He's turned his yard, a portion of his yard, into a demonstration area, and he puts signs up, and he's living right in the middle of a neighborhood, and they have like prairie parties in his yard. So you could do that. It'd be a great way to educate your neighbors or bring your neighbors in. You can collect seed, you can do plant exchanges, you can add signage where appropriate. This pollinator prairie patch is one that I designed for a couple of parks for the city of Fort Worth. And unfortunately, I put a honeybee on it because I thought that's going to be the most recognized species by the average person who doesn't really know about natural areas. But you can develop, if you like to give presentations, especially now that everyone's doing Zoom, you could do live Zoom presentations or in person at some point. And you can support municipal regulations and projects that create or protect habitat at your local park, through your Parks Department, through, like the city of Fort Worth has an open space committee and is actively saving open space now in addition to parks. And you can provide, like I said, this habitat. So this is a really good resource right here from Parks and Wildlife that was written by the entomologist for Texas Parks and Wildlife before he moved on. And it basically tells you all these things. Create diverse habitat for these pollinators. So for egg laying, for larval feeding sites, you want nest sites like dead trees or down trees, fairgrounds, standing dead vegetation, for all these different things like the ground nesters, the tunnel nesters, the cavity nesters. You want hunting and perch sites, and you want overwintering sites as well. And I'm just going to kind of go through this really quick. I don't really have much to say about these other than these are pictures that I took in my yard. the different flowers and what pollinators I found on them. Okay, the milkweeds, okay, that wasn't in my yard. That's the exception, but several different species of milkweed. And then the yellow flowers, as we like to call them. Well, cowpen daisy is considered a weed, and you find it in waste spaces, but it is one of the best pollinator plants, and it's blooming from the early in the summer all the way into fall, and it makes a great nectar source for monarchs. And again, all of these pictures were from my yard. And then here's some more yellow plants: Jerusalem artichoke, Maximilian sunflower. Again, goldenrods are excellent, excellent, excellent pollinator plants. And frostweed is blooming late in the season. That's another really good one. I find all kinds of pollinators on that, plus parasitoids and predators of pollinators like this ambush bug. Let's see, next. Then, of course, mints. There are several native mints. There's actually, as far as bee balms, we have 4 bee balm species that are just in North Texas, and they are like a magnet. That's why they're called bee balm. They really attract the bees, and they also attract the predators of the bees. I think I don't have a picture there. I often find spiders, link spiders on them. Oh, like this right here. Link spiders that are capturing the pollinators whenever they come up. And then here's a crab spider that's gotten the sulfur. Here's a link spider. Robber fly. So a lot of these predators are going to be hanging out next to flowers so that they can catch their next meal. And resources, of course, the internet is full of resources. Native Prairies Association of Texas is a good resource, the Xerces Society, really any of these listed plus a lot more are good resources. I've put some books here that I think are good resources. This one, The Butterfly Gardening for Texas. Very good book. Even if you're not going to do gardening, it's a good book. Let's see. And then I just wanted to leave you with this. E.O. Wilson: if all mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse. And I do believe it would collapse into chaos for sure. And with that, here's a nice little bee poster that's out on the internet, and at the bottom it has all the different organizations that help promote and support conservation of native bees. And with that, learn more about prairies from texasprairie.org. And I'm gonna do one more poll and then you're done. So, and then I'll answer questions. So my question is, did you know of Native Prairies Association of Texas before you found out about this presentation? So I am a board member of Native Prairies Association for the state as well as the Fort Worth chapter. And I work for the City of Fort Worth Park Department. So I'm super passionate about prairies. In fact, this past weekend I was at Madden Prairie volunteering, and it's so amazing. And NPAT has so many great prairies across the state, and we totally could use your help. If anyone's interested in helping with education or doing volunteer work at an actual prairie or donating to Native Prairies, we're a volunteer-run organization with only 2 employees. So we really could use your help. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling. So out of everyone who voted, 58% do know about NPAT and 42% do not. So I'm glad that the 42% has now learned about Native Prairies Association of Texas, and that the 58% came and listened in on this presentation. So with that, I know I went over a little bit, and I apologize for that. This is my first real presentation on Zoom. So what I would like to do is just open up the chat, and anyone who wants to leave, feel free. Don't feel like you're held captive by me. Anyone who wants to stay on, I'm just going to go through and see what you said, if we have any questions. So. Let's see. I could try to unmute. I don't know how to do that though right now.
Michelle, I noticed someone asked if you plan to make the presentation available.
Yes, I'm going to see if it recorded and how it recorded. So I think I have everyone's email, so we can send out an email as well. So let me just go down. And who was that? Was that Kate or Suzanne?
It was Kate, and the person who asked was Nancy Dieringer.
Okay, thank you. So let's see, I want to tell everyone about a new prairie restoration site of the Southwest County Courthouse on Granbury Road. If anyone's interested in going up there for a bit of invasive control, let Joanne Collins know or email fwnpat@gmail.com. They need help maintaining that area. Let's see. Let's see, someone said they haven't seen any bee balm. Looks like. Let's see, does the UV running pad only happen on yellow flowers? I actually do not know the answer to that. I suspect there are quite a few flowers that have UV markings on them, but I'd have to do some research to find out which ones, or maybe they all do.
I thought there were some that had like purple ones may have it. I'm not sure, but I did watch a video several months ago. I can't remember what was in it, but it was about pollinators, and I wish I knew some more of that data. But I think that there's blues too, blues and a lot of other like those kinds of colors can actually have the UV light to them. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 75%.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to research that, because I actually don't know. I just knew that the black-eyed Susan does that as an example. Goldenrod, super nice. Moss pollinate. Let's see what else. Green. Someone said it seems like seeing less and less native bees each year. I think it's more being in a city, if you live in a city versus out in the country. Obviously, there's more habitat outside of cities, so that could be it. However, I'm always surprised at what you do find in a city. Oh, did I misspell Tiffid wasp? Typo in Tiffid.
Yeah, that shit was lying. Yeah, I was being nitpicky right there.
No, I do that too.
I was like, wait a minute. I know that name from INAT, because I've seen those like several times. I'm like, I had one in my backyard recently. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not so the Y. That's so the Y.
Yeah, I will definitely correct that.
So, with the bees, I was gonna kind of chime in on this. My native garden that I have on the side, I'm on my house right now, and I got it over on my side yard, and it's a pretty sizable one. I've got some Indian blankets right now and a few others, and I get tons of bees. I got some sweat bees, and I did a thynid wasp and several other things. So it kind of depends on, just how many plants you have, I guess. And,
yeah.
I mean,
how many? And what yeah, definitely. I mean, the important thing is just to get natives in your yard, or even if you live like in an apartment, put them on your balcony or, you know.
Yeah, I live in a cul-de-sac in the middle of the city, and it's all just yards and stuff. So I'm kind of trying to break the mold here and, you know, build up on my thing. So it's just really like, it's crazy, and I'm trying to get my neighbors to, like, you know, change their ways, and it's just like, with one, it's a losing battle.
Yeah, well, no,
So, yeah,
we can lead by example. Isn't that what we all try to do in our lives?
Yeah,
Any
we
place
do.
is lead by example. So, let's see, I see someone asked, aren't bagworms detrimental to native plants? So the bagworms that are on the cedar, they're not really harming the plant at all. Let's see, the polls are fun. As a former teacher, they engage the learner and get them actively listening. So thank you. When I set those polls up, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm overkilling on the polls, but
oh, I love them.
Yeah, I think they're kind of fun.
Yeah.
Let me see.
It kind of, you know, it's interesting to see the mindset of some people. That's what I like about them.
Yeah, exactly. So Zach said, bagworms, pretty cool. Seen them on the yucca moth at Southwest Nature Preserve. I know at Southwest Nature Preserve there are Glen Rose yucca there. So you probably saw them on Glen Rose.
I actually did a monitoring event out there. So we collected the seeds and we sent them off to Austin because they had a problem with their deer, and so we were just like, we took the GPS readings and then we filled them up and then we shipped them out. So that was one of my very first volunteer jobs ever at being a naturalist. So. Yeah,
I helped them with because I had fenced off the Glen Rose Nature Center, so they came out to see how we did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so someone said that's TxDOT for you. So I don't mean to begrudge TxDOT because they do have a manual for roadside wildflowers, but I was just so incensed. Probably I'm just a little bit easier to get upset lately, but I was like,
hey, Michelle,
spreading poison everywhere. Yes.
Michelle, can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Yeah, first, let me say, great presentation. Learned a lot. And the polls weren't too much. They are a great way to engage the audience. So keep up that. That's a great tool. Quick question for you. For the typical North Texas resident who lives in a very urban area, or probably on a suburban lot, and wants to do something to help, particularly native pollinators, what are a couple of things you would suggest that they do right off the bat?
So I would establish, I have a couple of things. So most people are going to have like a completely manicured yard, right? Like a lawn, and they're going to mow it. Well, if you could designate some flower beds that are messy and line them with rocks or something so that people understand that it's separate from your yard, you're not being messy, this is a different area, and you could sign it as well. I wouldn't buy plants at like Lowe's or somewhere. I would go to Native Plant Society sales or talk to people within the Native Plant Society or Native Graves Association and see if you can get some native plants from those people, either buy them or do some plant exchanges, and just start small and plant them in an area. And I would probably say try to group the plantings. So like say you get, I would go with perennials also, just because they'll keep coming back, so you don't feel like you've lost your input. But so say a good example would be like Engelmann's daisy. Get a bunch of Engelmann's daisy and plant those in a group so that it makes one big show, and then do some more of a different species. And Zach is holding up the
Native American seed catalog,
catalog. Yeah, I would recommend looking at their website, asking for a catalog, and you could get seed from them. But I think the biggest bang for your buck or no buck is if you do some plant exchanges, because once you start growing things in your yard and people compliment you on it, then that's your end to give them plants. and get them interested in it, and do a sign if you get a large one. Let's see, our ag exemption status needs to be revised to allow smaller than 10-acre tracts. I 100% agree with that, because a lot of people are buying up larger, you know, like ranches that have been subdivided, and they're moving out into these areas on large tracts or even small tracts, even 1-acre tracts, and the way that they manage it really could be detrimental to pollinators. So if ag exemptions and a requirement by Texas Parks and Wildlife to manage for wildlife, if that were more common, that would be really helpful. Let's see, I'm just gonna read some more questions. Oh, Joanne said you can do the bird count for the Native Prairies Association Birdathon, which goes through the 13th. Let's see, Zach took some pictures of different pollinators and reading a book called Journey to the Ants. That sounds awesome.
It's right here. It's by Ed Wilson and Bert Holdobler. Really good. My friend Ann Mayo sent this to me, and she took like 3 books for the summer. So I'm just going through them, and they're really fascinating.
That sounds like a great, great book.
So good. They're really.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna do an insect collection with her pretty soon. So she wanted to talk about ants and get me interested in them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see. Someone said go organic. Diversity of plants. Big box stores don't have bees, etc., on their plants because they're grown with herbicides. It takes a lot for the herbicides to get out. And she emailed some photos that hoping we could ID them. And also, if you're still on, Barbara, or we'll reply to your email, you can put them on iNaturalist, which is a great resource. And I think I'm down to the bottom of the questions. Yeah, I think so. So with that, if anyone else has any questions, or I'll just show some awesome books here. This is a good book written by Mary Curry. Let's see, where's her name? Right there. Mary Curry, who lives in Weiss County. You're welcome. And are there any items on the July 14th ballot we should know of? I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. This is a good book too, Range Plants.
Yep, got that one.
That's a good one. And then I just bought these books recently, Edible Wild Plants of the Prairie and Medicinal Wild Plants of the Prairie. It's actually, they're written by Kelly Kinsher. He's out of Kansas, and he was a keynote speaker at the Native Prairies Association meeting. And then I just bought this book recently, which is not pollinators, but it's about fireflies. So.
Oh, yeah. Silent Spring. Yep.
So it says, just found Facebook, where can I find the old videos that we've done? I think there's a tab for videos. I know Suzanne Tuttle did a live Facebook walk a couple of weeks ago, and that is like if you go down the wall, you know, on the post, the wall post, you could probably find that video. We haven't done a whole lot of videos, but now with the whole COVID thing, we're increasingly, just like everyone else, going to be doing more videos and online. So probably a lot of our members, and even if anyone wants to volunteer yourself, of like if you have property that you want to share a short video of some of the things you find, we could start posting those types of things. So does anyone else have any other questions? I know I don't want to keep you all up past your bedtime. It's getting late. Bueller? Did y'all see my dress here just before? It's butterflies.
Like it. I like it.
I dressed
I'm
up.
wearing my bugs too. My bugs were. Yep.
Is anyone else wearing fancy clothes at home? All right, well, if nobody has any other questions, we'll let y'all get ready for bed, I suppose. Or get ready to stay up all night.
I know. I might do some mopping, so we'll see. Yeah, it's pretty muggy. I'm in my garage right now, so it's pretty hot in here. I have the fan going, so I'm like, I might have the mop like for a few hours and see what I can find.
Did you see, Zach, that I used my tent and a solar lamp?
Yeah, I did see that post. Yeah. I thought it was. You got 25 species, I believe you said.
Yeah, I haven't put them on iNaturalist yet, but I'm going to probably tomorrow or something, tomorrow night. But I was just like, why have I never thought of this? Just take a solar lamp and put it in the tent and then do your mopping that way. It was like hours of entertainment, y'all.
Yeah. On Thursday, I'm going to Lyndon B. Johnson State Park. I went to Caddo Lake Wednesday of last week, so we're kind of like doing day trips now, and I'm doing some stuff out there and just kind of getting away for a little bit. It's chaotic out there, but playing it safe, not going on a weekend, and it's doing good. I was looking at the species list yesterday on iNet. It's fine.
I think it's just such a great outlet. Nature is such a cure for so many ills. So I am sending you all a chat. Thank you. And you're welcome. And I guess I'm going to shut down this party. Woo! Thank y'all for listening and letting me ramble on for a very long time, probably almost 2 hours. So that's what happens when you're hunkered down at home for too long. You talk, you chat.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well, thank you again, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and say adios. I can't do that. Bye. Ciao, y'all.